This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio show. We're coming to you live from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, and the joint is jumping tonight, as you can probably tell from the noise in the background. We have an interesting show planned for you this evening. We're going to be speaking to Dr. Brad Radu. He is a professor at the University of Louisville Medical School, and he specializes in something called tobacco harm reduction, which frankly to me sounded a bit sketchy at first, and we'll have him explain that. It sounded a bit interesting anyway. We also have a state legislator, a Republican from Dickinson, Mr. Alan Fair, and we also have with us a gentleman from Reynolds American, which is a tobacco company. Scott, we also have with us, of course, I should have mentioned it before now, we have Mr. Scott Hennon, who's our co-host. And Scott, what kind of specials do we have at the restaurant this evening?
It's Tuesday, so I'm guessing you know what that means, Dale.
It is Tuesday. What is Tuesday?
Teeny Tuesday.
Teeny Tuesday,
As
yes.
in martini.
Martini.
Yes, exactly. You're not much of a teeny guy.
I guess I'd remember it better if I drank martinis.
Dale goes for the scotch rather than the martinis.
Straight single malt scotch for me, I'm afraid.
Teeny Tuesday means 2-for-1 martinis, and all the appetizers until 10 tonight are $2 off at the award-winning Peacock Alley, I might add. Now they have that brand new distinction. The National Cattlemen's Association has given them the National Beef Innovator of the Year Award. And they literally were on the big screen in Times Square for that award recently. It's a pretty exciting deal, and what they do with their beef and how they prepare it's pretty extraordinary at Peacock.
Yes, it's. I mean, it was quite staggering that they were able to win that award, because they're competing with restaurants from all over the country. They're competing with the big dollar, hoity-toity places in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, and they won. And here we are in Bismarck, North Dakota, with an extreme prize-winning establishment and chef.
Dale and Melody Zimmerman are the owners here. They've done a wonderful job with it. So it's a great place to call home for the Legislature Today show. Whenever you're in Bismarck for the show, we invite you to stop on down to the Patterson Building at downtown Bismarck and join us. Busy day today at the Legislature, so much so they're doing morning and afternoon sessions now, right, Dale? Give us a quick recap of what happened.
Yeah, I'll have to go through like machine gun fashion because there's so many things. The Senate defeated a proposal to buy out the contract of the North Dakota University System Chancellor, Ham Shirvani. That would cost about $850,000 over the two years of his contract. He's paid $349,000 a year. There's some legislators that don't like his management style, and the state student association has come out against him in supporting a buyout, but the Senate doesn't like that idea. Don't look for this to go away. Don't look for this to go away, because we still have half the legislature to go, and we have the House to weigh in on this question. The Senate also approved oil tax overhaul. It sets the minimum tax or the maximum tax rate for oil production, lowers it from 11.5% to 9.5%. This would start in January 2017. The Republicans say that this would make for a more stable tax climate in North Dakota and also make us more competitive with other oil-producing states. Democrats in the Senate say that this tax cut is unnecessary, that it's essentially a multi-million and possibly a multi-billion-dollar giveaway to the oil industry. This doesn't mean that oil taxes are going to be dropping. It means they're going to be, at least if production continues increasing, it means they'll be rising at a less exponential rate if oil tax rates are cut, and we'll see how that whole idea fares in the House. There was a bill in the North Dakota House that requires voters to bring identification to the polls for the first time. Right now, you don't have to bring an ID to the polls, although you're encouraged to do so, and the people in the poll workers usually ask you for one, but if you don't have one, you can vote anyway if you sign a sworn statement saying that you know that you're eligible to vote in that precinct. What this bill does, it says you have to bring an ID to the polls. It can be your driver's license, it can be a non-photo ID that is supplied by the Department of Transportation. This also gives the Secretary of State quite broad discretion in determining what is an acceptable ID. I'm wondering if they'll accept my concealed weapon carry permit as an ID. We'll see about that. And this bill will go to the Senate. We'll see how the Senate cottons to the idea of requiring voter ID, because that's, frankly, that's a controversial subject in other states. One other thing that the House did was they defeated a proposal to shorten the number of days that voters can come and vote in what are called early voting precincts. The county auditors in North Dakota can set those up as much as 15 days before the election. People can come in and vote as normal. Usually these are set up at the county courthouse, but sometimes they're set up at hotels and places that are convenient. It makes voting more convenient for folks, and you can vote early and get it out of the way. But, frankly, some legislators don't like it because it screws up their campaigning style, I guess. And there was a bill to shorten that period of time that early voting could be offered from 15 days to 8 days. That was defeated. So with all of that, I'd like to introduce our guest this evening. We're going to be talking about tobacco harm reduction, which is essentially it's a theory that smoking cigarettes is bad, but if you can't quit, it's better to use another product which also might be hazardous, but it's a lot less hazardous than sucking in cigarette smoke into your lungs. That's what's called tobacco harm reduction theory or therapy. And the reason folks are a bit suspicious of it, if I might say, is that this sort of thing is encouraged by tobacco companies and financed by them. And we'll see if we can kind of sort out whether it makes any sense when you consider that factor. Anyway, we have Mr. Brad Rideau. He is a professor at the University of Louisville's Medical School. He is a holder of an endowed chair of tobacco harm reduction, and he's a dentist by training. We also have with us Representative Alan Fair, as in fair and balanced, as right. He said. And he is a member of the House Human Services Committee, which held a hearing on a concurrent resolution that suggests that the legislature over the next 2 years study the subject of tobacco harm reduction. Now, how this works is if this resolution is approved by the House and Senate, then it will go into a stack of resolutions that the legislature will consider as a study subject for the next 2 years. And if it's studied, then we'll be collecting a lot of information about this subject. Mr. Rideau, first of all, could you tell me about tobacco harm reduction and how you got into this subject?
Well, as you said, I'm a dentist, but I'm also an oral and maxillofacial pathologist. It's been my job for the last 25 to 30 years to look into a microscope and find mouth cancer under the microscope from biopsies from people's mouths. And after about 12 years of practicing oral pathology, in the middle of the Deep South at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, I started to notice that I was not seeing cases of mouth cancer in people who use smokeless tobacco. And this was a disconnect because I was teaching my medical and dental students that it was a death sentence for mouth cancer. And so I started to do research on this, published my first paper in 1994, and that research shows that smokeless tobacco use is 98% safer than smoking. And in fact, is so safe that we can barely measure the actual health risks with any precision. And so I started to outline in professional papers a way that smokers, if they were unable or unwilling to quit tobacco entirely, and we've got lots of them, that they could switch to a vastly safer product, thus reducing their health risks.
Have your research findings been duplicated by anyone in terms of the relative risk involved in smokeless tobacco use?
It's now widely known among scientists who study tobacco issues that smokeless tobacco products are, in fact, vastly safer than smoking. There's no question about that. In fact, the British Royal College of Physicians in 2002 said that smokeless tobacco is 10 to 1,000 times less hazardous than smoking. So this is an established fact. It's a matter of how we're going to implement those strategies to help smokers lead longer and healthier lives.
The fact that you said that smoking is much more hazardous than smokeless tobacco use, is that a function of smokeless tobacco use being relatively safe, or is it a function of smoking being quite harmful for you?
Well, clearly smoking's harmful. But the key here is nicotine is the reason people smoke. It's the addiction, but it's not the killer. Smoke is the killer. It's the delivery system. Smoke contains 3,000 to 5,000 different chemicals that ultimately result in a 20 or 30-year career in lung cancer, heart disease, stroke, and emphysema. Taking that nicotine in a smoke-free form, whether it's in smokeless tobacco products or e-cigarettes, again, is vastly safer. Now, no one is saying that it's perfectly safe, but we need to let smokers know this so they can ultimately make a choice, and we can avoid those almost 900 deaths that are occurring in North Dakota each and every year.
Why not nicotine gum? Wouldn't that be just as good as putting smokeless tobacco in your mouth?
Nicotine gum is a great substitute, but it's meant to wean smokers to nothing, basically to wean them to abstinence over about a 10-week period. So nicotine gum is made to be non-addictive and unsatisfying for smokers. So a smoker walks into a pharmacy, it's $30 to $50, number one. It's a medicine. It's expensive, and most smokers don't have that in their pocket. Number two, they get it home, and it's unsatisfying. It just doesn't provide the nicotine kick that smokers need when they smoke or use a tobacco product. And for those reasons, nicotine has been shown in meta-analyses and large studies to have a success rate of exactly 7%. That's a 93% failure rate for an FDA-approved medicine. We have to do better.
Representative Fair, what did you think of this idea? I mean, you sit on the House Human Services Committee, and you listened to the testimony about this resolution. Tell me what your impressions were of it and the efficacy of it.
Well, first of all, let me say that this is a resolution different than most bills, but like most bills, the first thing that happens, it's introduced, we hear testimony in favor, we hear testimony opposed, and then we sit back, and maybe it's a day or the same day or a week or whatever, but then eventually we get back together and discuss it as a committee. So we've heard testimony. We have not, as a committee, discussed this. But as a resolution, it's a resolution saying that the legislative management should do a study. And so it starts off as a resolution with the whereas this, whereas this, whereas this, whereas this, and it goes on to say, and therefore, and be it resolved that there will be a study with results coming back in 2 years.
Do you think that there's any point to doing a study of this subject, the legislature doing one?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't made up my mind on that. I'm still kind of looking at it, and the problem that I'm having with it is I'm a facts guy. I'm interested. Give me the facts. And so, to begin with, when we started this, is we've got somebody who is flown in, and he's not hired by a tobacco company, but his employer gets tobacco funds. His travel up here, again, is not a tobacco company, but it's financed by an agency that apparently takes tobacco funds. So there's at least some contamination in terms of saying, is he an independent researcher? No, I don't think so. Does that mean his research is bad? Not necessarily. You know, it just tells me I'm trying to weigh out the facts.
Mr. Radu, how do you deal with the factor that Representative Fair just mentioned? I mean, are you some tobacco industry shill, or what are you?
I'm a professor at a major medical school in the Midwest. And if what I was saying was wrong, then that university would not have me on its faculty. I started publishing in this field in 1994. And from 1994 to 1999, I published a series of papers that were supported only by my department. And my critics said I was a tobacco industry shill. And then we ran out of money, and the traditional funding agencies in this country, the National Institutes of Health, the American Cancer Society, they rejected any consideration of this. And so we turned to the tobacco industry. And from 1999 till now, I have those funds. But those funds went to my universities. They were managed by my universities according to all university standards. And in fact, we impose standards on these that other grants don't have. For example, we determined that we would not consider any we don't consider that the grants are restricted in any way. So we have complete authority over exactly what we do with the money. But we do have money in which to conduct further research. I used those funds to go to Sweden in 2002, from which I was able to describe this idea really having a population benefit in Sweden. It's now resulted in Swedish men living longer and suffering less smoking-related disease than any other men in the European Union. And we were able to use this to bring that experience back to the United States. So I understand that my critics will call this a tobacco industry front, but I ask them to look at the science, because the science is there and the science is solid.
Do you think that the tobacco industry would be supporting this work if your conclusions were that smokeless tobacco was not that much less dangerous than smoking?
They don't have a choice. They don't have a choice. Once they've given the funds to the university, they don't have a choice. And I'll give you an example. We had our first grant in 1999. In 2003, I published the first study of tobacco-specific nitrosamines, a contaminant that is a bit of a toxic agent in tobacco products. And my funding source had the highest levels of that agent in their products. We published it. We published the truth. And so the funding does not affect what we produce and our results. And so I feel we have independence and integrity in the presentation of our work.
I know you mentioned that your data has shown that smokeless tobacco is less hazardous than smoking. But isn't, frankly, there something inherently kind of disgusting about taking a big wad of tobacco and sticking it between your teeth and gum?
Absolutely. Traditional smokeless tobacco products have that spitting image. Absolutely. But modern products can be used invisibly. Now, again, I'm not promoting tobacco use, but smokers need to know that they can use modern products spit-free. The Swedes taught us that. They take their packet of tobacco, they place it in their upper lip that causes no spitting. So we do have ways that this can be socially acceptable. It's less hazardous, but it can also be socially acceptable for most smokers, men and women. And in fact, my Swedish studies show that recently, as late as 2004, Swedish women have adopted snus use from their husbands, because they're seeing that it's safer and it's socially acceptable.
Where do e-cigarettes fall in this continuum? I mean, are they useful in terms of trying to wean people off of cigarettes?
E-cigarettes are an excellent substitute.
First of all, can you explain what an e-cigarette is?
An e-cigarette is a tube that contains a solution of nicotine, glycerin or propylene glycol, and water. And when a user pulls on it or drags on it, it releases a vapor containing those things. And so this vapor delivers nicotine. It delivers it in a way that satisfies smokers' behavioral needs, and it's vastly safer. Now, they've only been available since 2006, so we don't have 5 decades of epidemiologic studies that we have with smokeless tobacco, none of which those epidemiologic studies were funded by the tobacco industry. But we don't have the epidemiology, but we have to know that a vapor is much less hazardous than smoke. And so we're comfortable. And in fact, I conducted the first ever community smoking cessation program in Owensboro, Kentucky. And we actually recommended that smokers switch to either smokeless tobacco or e-cigarettes.
Do state health departments generally support what you're doing?
No. State health departments join most of the medical organizations in this country to try to have smokers abstain from all tobacco use. They have, as a vision, a tobacco-free society. And I'll leave it up to your listeners to their opinion on whether or not we can actually achieve a tobacco-free society.
To what extent do you do this with other state legislatures? I mean, do you go around and testify on like resolutions of this nature in other states?
I've had the opportunity to present my findings and to educate lawmakers in several states.
Which ones?
Well, there was a hearing. We had a hearing in Kansas last year. There's been a hearing in Oklahoma. I've talked with legislators in several different states.
What resulted from these hearings? Anything?
We had a hearing in Indiana, and they have embedded language about tobacco harm reduction in legislation, as has my home state of Kentucky. The tobacco harm reduction is now seen as an option for smokers to some extent.
I had never heard of tobacco harm reduction until a few days ago. How recent a discipline, if you can call it that, is this?
Well, I've been publishing since 1994. In 2003, the U.S. Congress held a hearing. It was a House of Representatives committee hearing, which I testified at. And since then, there has been a growing awareness that this can be an acceptable option for smokers.
We're speaking to Brad Radu, who is a professor at the University of Louisville Medical School. We've also been speaking to Representative Alan Fair of Dickinson. He's a Republican. He sits on the House Human Services Committee, which is considering a study resolution as to whether the legislature should take a closer look during the next 2 years at the theory of tobacco harm reduction, which essentially attempts to persuade people who smoke cigarettes to switch to less hazardous forms of tobacco use. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Short break, talking income tax proposals in the House and Senate next on the Legislature Today.
Down below 5%, which is an attractive goal. Has about a $250 million fiscal note, and look forward to seeing as that bill moves over to the House and where it goes.
Why did you think of these figures in terms of the tax reduction as the appropriate ones?
Well, it's I don't know if they are the appropriate ones. We'll get closer to what the appropriate level of tax reduction is as we move towards the end of the session and get into conference committees. But my goal, I think, at the beginning was about $1 million or $1 billion in tax relief. That's going to come in the form of property tax and personal income tax and corporate income tax. And so $250 million, I introduced the bill at $125 million. It's basically what the governor wanted in his budget. We doubled the size of it, and we'll see where it goes.
And speaking of doubling the size of it, we have Representative Craig Hedlund, who is the Vice Chairman of the House Finance and Tax Committee. He is the lead sponsor of a bill that the House has approved that cuts income taxes, both corporate and individual, by $500 million over 2 years. Representative Hedlund, could you just explain what your philosophy was in terms of drafting this bill and exactly what it does?
Well, Dale, yes, and thank you for inviting me to talk on this today. The idea is to reduce revenues coming into the state. Individual and corporate income tax revenues have increased by really large levels. Corporate income tax has actually increased by 300% of what we budgeted and we said we needed to fund priorities. Individual income tax is slightly lower than that, I think somewhere around 168% of what was projected. So we're bringing in a lot more revenue than we said we needed in those areas, and I thought it was important that we take some of that money and give it back to the taxpayers that we're taking it from.
Representative Kelsch, you've been listening to these tax proposals, and could you just explain what your approach is to the need for income tax cuts of any kind, whether they be corporate or individual?
Well, whenever I see bills like this, I'm wondering what is the problem that we're trying to fix here. I mean, if our economy is already on overdrive and it's working under our current tax structure, and we've been continuing to grow based on what the current sales tax collections, what those impositions of taxes are, what are we trying to fix? I think it's, people are clamoring for property tax relief more than income tax relief. We saw it most recently on the ballot in 2008. It was soundly defeated, and I think we're down in tax rates to that level where that ballot measure was aiming to see us go. And I think, Measure 2 was defeated, but I think they were relying on the legislature to make some sound decisions on applying property tax relief. Now, we all voted for the comprehensive bill, but we did not like the corporate income tax cuts as a caucus, simply because 82% of those, all the income taxes collected, go to out-of-state companies, and 46% of those go to 10 companies specifically. So we're saying, well, let's provide property tax relief or income tax relief to our own citizens first, and then if there's any left over, maybe we can talk about addressing those other needs.
And could you talk about what the House Democratic caucus did in the House to try to separate out the corporate income tax element of that bill?
Well, the bill had essentially 5 sections, and one of them was an emergency clause, so it would have gone into effect right away as soon as it was signed by the governor. But there were individual income tax cuts. There were financial institutions tax, which is a different section of code, and then how that was distributed was another section, and then finally the corporate income tax cut. So our House caucus asked to have the question divided. All those sections of the bill that applied to individuals and financial institutions was considered in one piece, and then the corporate income tax cut was considered as a separate piece.
Senator Cook and Representative Hedlund, could you address the idea that what Representative Kelch said, that folks are not clamoring for income tax cuts? Is this a reason? First of all, do you agree with that premise? And secondly, even if you do, is it a reason to not cut income taxes?
Dale, I definitely agree. I have a few people looking at cutting income tax. Usually when I talk to somebody, they want to eliminate them. But the number one priority is property tax, and we're going to go down that road. But you don't need to have a problem that needs to be fixed to do something. Sometimes what you're doing just works so well, you keep doing it. And this is, again, the third session in a row where we have been able to lower our personal and corporate income tax. And the result of that is a strong economy and more tax collections. If you look at the salaries of people in North Dakota, we are setting the standard in the nation. We're number one as far as growth in personal income. And I would argue that it's definitely related to the economy, which is definitely related to our tax policy. So it works.
Well, that is correct, Dale. And if you look at some of these corporations, businesses we're talking about, they are our largest employers in the state. And I think that they have done a tremendous job of showing us, they're going to be here and they're going to grow here if we give them the opportunity to. So as Senator Cook said, the salaries are increasing by the largest ratio available in this country, and this is good for North Dakota taxpayers, good for North Dakota employees who work for these companies.
What is the end game here as far as income tax is concerned? And I wanted to ask particularly Senator Cook and Representative Hedlund this. Is it to eliminate income tax entirely, or is it just to get it to microscopic levels, or what is the goal, the longer term goal?
I don't know if there's a real end game to eliminate it. We have a lot of legislators that would like to eliminate them. I don't look at myself as being in that group yet. But it's interesting, and when we look at it as a state, we compete with other states, and there's a trend going on in this country. I just got a study done by the Council of State Governments. 9 states out there right now are looking at reducing corporate income tax in 2013. A lot of these states are states that are not financially flush like we are. Most of them are hurting. I think there's another 5 states that are looking at eliminating all income taxes, and they're doing it to try to jumpstart an economy. So there's a recognition out there that tax policy is definitely related to economy, and it's just sound policy. So, we always got to look at what our neighbors are doing. We got to be competitive, and if the time comes when we have to eliminate them to be competitive, we got to do it.
Well, and Dale, I would add, I think it's part of the reason the bills have been put in is to try to balance revenues with spending. And I don't see any reason to take money from taxpaying citizens that they will spend and they'll run through the economy if we allow them to fund spending needs that are not really there, and does it really do any good for a North Dakota citizen to build huge surpluses that aren't needed? I think we want to fund priorities, and we're accomplishing that with the revenue that is on the table. House Bill 1250, if passed in its current form, still provides 30% more revenue than we said we needed last session. Now, I would challenge anyone to say that government can't operate efficiently on 30% more revenue than they received. Any state, any legislator from another state, I think would be envious of that position, and that's the reason that we need to pass this legislation. Now, I don't know what will happen with it in the end. I think we will find a balance between the spending and the tax reductions, but here we are. We're at halftime almost, and these are the proposals that have been passed.
Representative Kelsch, do we have a point of political difference here that can be used in the next election, frankly? I mean,
well, as I said, the voters have already rejected this proposal once, and when you look at a list of what corporations are looking for, where they want to domicile themselves, taxes are 15th or 16th on the list. What they're looking for is a well-trained, well-educated workforce. They're looking for amenities. They're looking for a pro sports team. They're looking for all kinds of things that where they decide to domicile themselves.
They're looking for some good bars downtown, like we're sitting in one.
Exactly,
yes.
Right. They're looking for fun.
Yes.
And amenities, as I said. And they're looking for all kinds of recreational activities and things. But primarily, they're looking for an educated workforce. And when we talk about some of these expansions that are currently going on right now, Caterpillar, Microsoft and Fargo, they're all dependent on having those universities turn out people that know what they're doing. And that's where we ought to be investing our dollars, because that's what corporations are looking for, and that's what they're looking to hire. And we ought to be looking at those other sorts of amenities that bring people to North Dakota.
Is what is being done right now with income tax in particular, does this present a hazard in the future if as we have seen, not in the not too distant past, oil prices decline, farm commodity prices decline, and we're end up a bit strapped perhaps? Is that going to make it difficult for, if you have the income tax at that point bringing in much less money than it did, what does that do?
It definitely does. If we're looking at raising the income tax again, it's going to be much more difficult to raise that tax than it is to lower it, as we've been doing for the last 3 sessions. But we need to also, there have been several proposals for a one-time rebate or a one-time tax credit so that we can give money back to the taxpayers that reside in North Dakota, but without affecting the rates. And I think those were much better approaches.
Well, Dale, I would contend that the income tax, a tax that's exclusive to us at the state, is the easiest tax for us to increase if need be. I don't know how, when we start buying down mills like we're doing at the school level, or some other proposals that we have on property tax, how do we go and claw back money there when the money is not there to fund those programs? We don't levy the tax, so at some point there's going to be some trouble, and the income tax, it's not going to be popular to have to come back and raise taxes, but again, it all comes back to balancing revenues with spending. And we don't need to take more money from the taxpaying citizens in North Dakota than we need to cover our priorities.
Couldn't agree more. You're looking at me, Dale. You got that say something, Dwight look, and I'm going to do so, but I will argue again that the taxpayers don't ask for it, but they certainly enjoy seeing their salaries go up. They certainly enjoy seeing the low unemployment. Wasn't that long ago the biggest problem in North Dakota was to keep our youth home. The biggest argument was because all the kids were leaving and going to work for other states. We solved that problem, and we got an economy running. That's the most important thing on the table.
I would like to bring up, just for sake of argument, the subject of sales tax. I mean, there are a few bills to lower the sales tax rate, either by 1 point or 1% or 0.5%. And the sales tax is we've been talking about income tax, corporate and individual, but the real revenue monster in state government is the sales tax. And it also, it's what most people pay. I mean, everyone pays it when you buy something, you pay it. Did you either, Representative Hedlund and Senator Cook, did either of you think that the sales tax reduction was a more fruitful way to go when you're talking about tax relief for the citizens?
Dale, the Senate Finance and Tax Committee kicked out a tax bill, a sales tax reduction bill that lowered the tax rate from 5 to 4.5, unanimous, 7-0, do pass. We had one little caveat with it, though. We capped all the political subdivisions who levy sales tax at 2%. It was a good bill. Unfortunately, in the Senate, once the local governments got on board and they started twisting arms, you know what happened? The amendment that put on to cap the local governments at 2% was taken off. Now we're going to probably have to defeat that bill tomorrow. But that was a good bill. That put money right back in the taxpayers' pocket. I liked the bill. And I think it's important that at some point we get a control of sales tax. Cities and counties should be able to live with 2% in sales tax rates. I don't know where this is going to go. Pretty soon their sales tax for local governments is liable to be higher than the state has.
Well, Dale, Senator Cook did a great job of eloquently stating why the House Finance and Tax Committee rejected sales tax reductions, because it's not exclusive to us. The state some time ago gave political subdivisions that opportunity to tax through sales, and they need those revenues to fund their local needs, just like we need revenues to fund our state needs. So income tax to us was the direction that we wanted to go because it was completely under our control.
It was interesting to observe that there's like close to 60 cities in North Dakota that have a 2% sales tax. And that's, should that be, in your opinion, and I wanted to ask this of all three of you, to what extent should local governments be limited in their ability to levy a sales tax?
Well, Dale, it's an excellent question. I just weighed into it. I think there should be a limit. I've owned my own business in Mandan now for 23 years. I ship all over North Dakota. I collect all these sales tax. I remember how few of them there were when I started. And I've watched the number of local governments, cities, and now counties that are levying sales tax, and it's just going to be more. Again, I don't know where it's going to end, but I think it's an issue that the legislature needs to get its hands around. And Craig's exactly right. If we cut the sales tax from 5 to 4.5%, it's just a matter of time, and local government's going to eat that tax back up, and the taxpayer in North Dakota didn't see any relief.
Well, I guess what I was thinking of was, should not these sales taxes are approved by the local voters, and should they not be trusted to make those decisions?
Well, it's an easy decision to make when you take a look at, you got a major shopping area, and a lot of the people that pay the tax don't get a vote. They live outside the jurisdiction that gets to make that vote, and this is a whole other topic and a whole other question, but it's a issue that the legislature sooner or later is going to have to wrestle with.
Yeah, I think all you have to do is look to the major retail areas and you see where the sales tax is collected. And, is it somewhat of a disadvantage for a small rural community that really doesn't have a lot of retail business to cap them on their sales tax? I don't know the answer to that. I frankly believe that sales tax, a consumption tax probably is the fairest method of taxation myself. I know that might be argued by other people, but a consumption tax, everybody pays on what they buy.
Representative Kelch, what's your philosophy about reduction of sales tax versus income tax?
It's an interesting question, and sales tax is probably one of the most regressive tax, in contrast to what my view is with Representative Hedlund. But it's a tax that you have to pay whether you can afford it or not, because everybody needs to buy certain things. Everybody needs certain commodities that they need to buy, and most of those are subject to the sales tax. So I think it's regressive. On the other hand, I am not in favor of limiting the ability of local governments to set their own sales tax rate, because they are set by voters, and people can vote with their feet. They don't have to go shop there. If they want to go to Fargo, they can shop there. If they want to go to Moorhead, they can go over there and pay no sales tax on clothing. So there are other options. They can buy online. They can buy other certain types of, or use other certain methods to purchase what they want. But I'm not in favor of that. I don't think that we would like it very well if the federal government put caps on what we could set our sales tax rate to be. And that's kind of how I view this, is we're telling locals who are elected, as well as we are, that no, you don't know enough to do it the right way.
I was just thinking, frankly, of what if the federal government said to the states, you can't charge more than 4% as a sales tax, because we obviously know better than you do in terms of what your sales tax rate should be. I mean, obviously the North Dakota legislature would be having a conniption fit, but at the same time, are you, frankly, not willing to do the same thing to communities that have their own elected governments?
Dale, I don't think that's quite apples to apples. The federal government doesn't levy a sales tax like we do. So
yeah,
you just wait, though.
Well.
And you know what? Then we'll have that argument if they ever go down that road and tell us to cap it. Then I suppose I'll be on Scott's side.
I'd like to know what all three of you gentlemen believe in terms of, is income tax reduction, or sales tax reduction for that matter, is that something that prevents you from doing what you'd really like to do in terms of property tax reduction? Is that an impediment?
No, I don't think it's an impediment. We're going to do what we want to do with property tax. We look at $1 billion in tax collections. We'll have a balanced tax reduction package, and it'll involve property tax.
Dale, in the House, our package, although we have not voted on the property tax relief bills yet, we are going to provide equal reductions. Our income tax bill is a 35% reduction in revenue, and when we are finished between two different pieces of legislation, we're going to be buying down property taxes by 35% as well.
Well, what I think is it's not necessarily an impediment, but there are other needs that aren't being addressed, and I think those are the roads, the infrastructure, the types of things that we want to see, that once the oil dries up, that we want to see as a state. And I think we can certainly be giving money back in the form of property tax relief and some modest income tax relief to our citizens, but I think we also have to be setting more aside, because once that oil is gone, we're going to be left with a big mess, and we need to have something set aside to be able to deal with that as we move forward.
Representative Hedlund, I should have asked you this earlier, but how did you settle upon the number of, I think it's $504 million in corporate and individual income tax reduction as the appropriate number?
Well, the number came after we decided how much reduction in revenue we were looking at, and we need to keep in mind House Bill 1250 is not a 35% reduction in rates; it's a 35% reduction in revenues. And I think the reason we went that direction is, to help balance that spending and revenue collection. So that's kind of what the number turned out to be. It's $361 million in individual income tax revenue reductions and about $140 million in corporate or business tax reductions.
How is this going to affect North Dakota's rankings in terms of, there are various organizations that rank states in terms of their business friendliness. Is this going to help the state of North Dakota at all, do you think?
Well, I can tell you exactly what happens with the business tax climate in North Dakota. According to the Tax Foundation, if we pass 1250, we go from a ranking of 35th to 31st in individual income tax, and that speaks to me that it says we need more work in that area. On the corporate tax, it reduces us down to 13th from, it escapes me right now, it's somewhere in the 20s. That business climate index helps us with recruiting companies to locate here.
Thank you, Representative Hedlund. The gentleman you just heard speaking was Representative Craig Hedlund. He is a Republican from Montpelier and the Vice Chairman of the House Finance and Tax Committee. We've also been speaking to Representative Scott Kelch, who's a Democrat from Fargo, a member of the House Finance and Tax Committee, and the Democratic candidate for state auditor last year. I should have mentioned that. And also we have had Senator Dwight Cook, a Republican from Mandan, the chairman of the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming and talking about income tax with us, and I'm sure it'll be a thriving subject in the next half of the legislature.
Thanks, Dale.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And how about that tie on Senator Cook? We the people, Dale. How about that? That's you can't see it on radio, but it's sharp, folks. Another hour of the legislature today.